Every year, billions of people around the world observe Good Friday. Churches hold services, communities gather, songs are sung, sermons are preached, and the entire Christian world marks the day that Jesus of Nazareth was crucified and died on a cross outside Jerusalem. Friday. That is what the tradition says. That is what the calendar says. That is what most churches teach without question. But here is the problem. Jesus himself made a very specific promise about how long he would be in the tomb. He did not say approximately 3 days. He did not say about a weekend. He said in Matthew chapter 12, verse 40, these exact words, "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." 3 days and 3 nights. Not 3 days and 2 nights, not 2.5 days, 3 complete days and 3 complete nights. Jesus staked his entire identity as the Messiah on that specific timeline, because the sign of Jonah was the one sign he pointed to as proof of who he was. Now get out your calendar and count. If Jesus died on Friday afternoon and rose on Sunday morning, how many days and nights is that? Friday night, 1 night. Saturday, 1 day. Saturday night, 2 nights. Sunday morning, not even a full day. That is 1 full day, 2 nights, and a partial Sunday morning. That is not 3 days and 3 nights by any honest count. And this is not a new problem. Scholars, theologians, historians, and serious Bible students have been wrestling with this mathematical impossibility for centuries. Yet every year, the entire Christian world celebrates Good Friday as if the numbers add up perfectly. Tonight, the Hidden Scrolls is going to do what very few teachers have ever done in a single complete presentation. We are going to lay out the full mathematical problem. We are going to go into the Jewish calendar of that specific Passover week. We are going to show you what most churches have never explained about the 2 Sabbaths in that week. We are going to present every serious theory about what day Jesus actually died, and we are going to let the Scripture itself tell us the answer. Because if Jesus promised 3 days and 3 nights, and the resurrection proved he kept every promise he ever made, then the mathematics have to work out somewhere. And they do, perfectly, just not on Friday. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you will never look at Good Friday the same way again. And more importantly, you will understand the death and resurrection of Jesus with a precision and a depth that most Christians have never been taught. The mathematical problem starts right now.
To understand why the day of the crucifixion matters so much, we have to go back to the moment Jesus made the promise. Matthew chapter 12 records a confrontation between Jesus and the Pharisees. The Pharisees came to him and said, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." They wanted him to prove himself with a miracle, to demonstrate his authority in a way they could evaluate and judge. And Jesus responded with something extraordinary. He said, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah." The sign of Jonah. That was it. That was the one sign Jesus pointed to as the proof of everything he claimed to be. And then he explained what the sign of Jonah meant. "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Now, understand what Jesus was doing in this moment. He was not being vague or approximate. He was being extremely precise. He used the exact same language that the book of Jonah uses to describe Jonah's time in the fish. 3 days and 3 nights. The same phrase, the same structure, the same precision. And this precision mattered enormously because the Pharisees he was speaking to knew the book of Jonah perfectly. They knew exactly what 3 days and 3 nights meant. They were not going to give him any wiggle room on partial days or approximate time frames. If he claimed 3 days and 3 nights, he was going to be held to 3 days and 3 nights. Jesus knew exactly what he was saying. He was making a specific, measurable, verifiable promise that anyone could check. If he was in the tomb for less than 3 days and 3 nights, then his own sign had failed. And if his sign had failed, then his claim to be the Messiah had failed with it. This is why the day of the crucifixion is not just a historical curiosity, it is a theological necessity. The exact timeline had to work out to 3 days and 3 nights, or the most important promise Jesus ever made was broken. Now, here is something remarkable that most people have never noticed about how the disciples and the chief priests both understood this promise. Matthew chapter 27, verse 63, records that after the crucifixion, the chief priests and Pharisees went to Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.'" After 3 days. Not after 2 days, not on the 3rd day, counting Friday as day 1, after 3 days. Even his enemies understood the promise as a full 3-day period. And then they asked Pilate to seal the tomb until after the 3rd day, until after 3 complete days had passed, because they understood that was the timeline Jesus had claimed. So the question that needs to be answered is simple. Does Friday afternoon to Sunday morning equal 3 full days and 3 full nights? And the answer, when you count honestly, is no. It does not come close. Now we come to the part of this story that most teachers skip completely when they discuss the crucifixion timeline. Because the question of 3 days and 3 nights is not just a mathematical puzzle. It opens up a much deeper question. What was actually happening during those 3 days and 3 nights when Jesus was in the heart of the earth? The Bible does not leave this entirely unanswered, and what it tells us is one of the most extraordinary and most overlooked passages in the entire New Testament. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 20 says this, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the spirit. After being made alive, he went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits. Between his death and his resurrection, Jesus went somewhere. He was not simply lying in a tomb in a state of unconscious death for 3 days. According to Peter, he was alive in the Spirit, and he went to a place where imprisoned spirits were held, and he made a proclamation to them. Ancient Jewish and Christian scholars have spent centuries discussing what this passage means. Who were the imprisoned spirits? What was the proclamation? And where exactly did Jesus go during those 3 days? The most widely held view among serious biblical scholars is that Jesus descended to the realm of the dead, what the Hebrew scriptures call Sheol and the Greek scriptures call Hades, and made a proclamation of his victory over sin and death to the spiritual beings held there. This was not simply Jesus waiting passively for 3 days until the resurrection. This was 3 days of extraordinary spiritual activity in a dimension we cannot see. 3 days of something happening in the spiritual realm that the physical world above the tomb was completely unaware of. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 9 records Paul saying that Jesus descended to the lower earthly regions before he ascended. Colossians chapter 2, verse 15 says he disarmed the powers and authorities and made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. The 3 days and 3 nights were not empty time. They were filled with something extraordinary happening in the spiritual realm, a cosmic reckoning, a declaration of victory in the very territory of the enemy, a proclamation that everything the cross had accomplished was now being announced in the place where the powers of death held their domain. And this is exactly why the precise duration matters. 3 days and 3 nights was not just the fulfillment of the sign of Jonah as a surface-level prediction. It was the exact time required for whatever Jesus was doing in those depths to be fully accomplished before the resurrection reversed everything that death had claimed. The tomb was not an ending place, it was a passageway, and 3 days and 3 nights was the time the journey through it required. By now, you are probably asking one very reasonable question. If the Wednesday crucifixion theory solves the mathematical problem so completely and so elegantly, why does the entire Christian world celebrate Good Friday instead of Good Wednesday? The answer to that question takes us into the history of the early church, and what we find there is not a conspiracy or a deliberate cover-up. It is something more human and more understandable than that. It is the story of how a tradition developed, became established, and eventually became so embedded in church culture that questioning it felt like questioning the faith itself. The earliest Christians did not celebrate Good Friday the way we celebrate it today. The early church celebrated what they called the Paschal celebration, a unified commemoration of the death and resurrection of Jesus that focused much more on the resurrection than on the specific day of the death. The day of the week was not the primary concern. The fact of the resurrection was everything. As the church grew and spread throughout the Roman Empire, it encountered a world that operated on the Roman calendar. The Roman week had 7 days, just as we have today, and Sunday was increasingly understood as the Lord's Day, the day of resurrection. As Sunday became the central day of Christian worship, the week leading up to Sunday resurrection began to be structured backward from Sunday. If Jesus rose on Sunday and was buried on the day before the Sabbath, which the Gospels confirm, then he must have been crucified on Friday. That was the logic, working backward from Sunday resurrection through Saturday Sabbath to Friday crucifixion. But this logic only works if you do not account for the 2 Sabbath week. If you assume there was only 1 Sabbath that week, then Friday is the only day that fits before Sunday. But if there were 2 Sabbaths that week, with a regular working day between them, then the entire backward calculation from Sunday changes completely. By the time the church had enough distance from its Jewish roots that the distinction between the regular Sabbath and the special feast day Sabbath was no longer part of common Christian understanding, the 2 Sabbath detail had been largely forgotten, and Friday had become the established tradition. This was not malicious, it was not a conspiracy, it was simply what happens when a tradition becomes established over centuries and the specific historical and cultural context that would allow someone to question it fades from living memory. The reformers who went back to Scripture in the 15th and 16th centuries questioned many traditions of the church, but they largely left the Good Friday tradition untouched, perhaps because the mathematical problem requires a detailed knowledge of the Jewish calendar and the Jewish feast day system that was not part of their primary focus. And so Good Friday continued, celebrated by billions, questioned by very few. And the mathematical problem that Jesus himself built into his most important promise sat quietly in Matthew chapter 12, waiting for someone to count the days honestly. Now you have. Before we arrive at our conclusion, it is important to be honest about the fact that the Wednesday crucifixion theory is not the only serious attempt to solve the 3 days and 3 nights problem. There are several other theories that serious scholars have proposed, and each one deserves to be heard and evaluated honestly. The first alternative theory is the Thursday crucifixion view. This view suggests that Jesus was crucified on Thursday rather than Wednesday. The reasoning is similar to the Wednesday theory in that it acknowledges the 2 Sabbath week, but it places the crucifixion 1 day later. Under the Thursday theory, Jesus died Thursday afternoon, the Passover feast Sabbath fell on Friday, the women bought spices on Saturday after the Passover Sabbath ended, and Jesus rose early Sunday morning. This gives approximately 2.5 days in the tomb. Supporters of this theory argue that in Jewish reckoning, Any part of a day counts as a full day, and so Thursday afternoon, Friday, and Saturday morning could be counted as 3 days, even without 3 full nights. The honest assessment of the Thursday theory is that it gets closer to solving the problem than Friday does, but it still does not give a clean 3 days and 3 nights. It requires a generous interpretation of partial days to make the mathematics work. The second alternative theory is the traditional Friday view with the Jewish partial day counting method. This is the explanation most churches use when the mathematical problem is raised. The argument is that in the Jewish cultural understanding of Jesus' day, any portion of a day could be referred to as a full day. So Friday afternoon counts as day 1, Saturday counts as day 2, and Sunday morning counts as day 3. The problem with this explanation is that Jesus did not just say 3 days. He said 3 days and 3 nights specifically. 3 nights are much harder to explain as partial nights than 3 days as partial days. Friday night is 1 night, Saturday night is a second night. There is no third night if Jesus rose before Sunday dawn. The third theory is the view held by some scholars that the sign of Jonah was not meant to be taken as a precise mathematical prediction, but rather as a general reference to the type of experience, a period of burial followed by emergence, and that the 3 days and 3 nights language was idiomatic rather than literal. This view has the least support among serious scholars because it requires treating Jesus' words as imprecise when he was clearly using very specific language from a specific Old Testament text to make a very specific claim about his identity. When you evaluate all 3 alternative theories honestly, the Wednesday crucifixion theory remains the one that requires the least amount of interpretive compromise. It takes the text at face value. It accounts for every detail in every gospel. It solves the mathematical problem completely, and it honors the precision of the promise Jesus made. 3 days, 3 nights, Wednesday to Saturday, exactly as promised.
There is one more piece of this puzzle that needs to be addressed, and it is the piece that most people find most surprising when they first encounter the Wednesday crucifixion theory. If Jesus was crucified on Wednesday and was in the tomb for 3 complete days and 3 complete nights, then he rose on Saturday evening, not Sunday morning. Saturday evening, after sunset, which in Jewish time was already the beginning of Sunday. The first day of the new week began when the sun went down on what we call Saturday evening. And this actually matches perfectly with what the Gospel of Matthew says about the resurrection morning. Most English translations of Matthew chapter 28, verse 1 say, "After the Sabbath at dawn, on the first day of the week, the women came to the tomb." But the Greek text is more precise than that translation suggests. The phrase translated as "after the Sabbath" in Greek is opse sabbaton, which can also be translated as late on the Sabbath, or at the end of the Sabbath. Some scholars argue that Matthew was describing a time just after sunset on Saturday when the Sabbath was ending and the first day of the week was beginning in Jewish reckoning. If that reading is correct, then Matthew himself was recording that the women came to the tomb at the very moment the Sabbath was ending and Sunday was beginning, and they found the tomb already empty. Jesus had already risen. When did he rise? At the end of the 3rd day and the 3rd night, Saturday at sunset, exactly 72 hours after he was placed in the tomb on Wednesday at sunset. The angel at the tomb did not say he just rose. He said he is not here. He has risen, past tense, already accomplished. The women arrived after it had already happened, which is entirely consistent with a resurrection that occurred at sunset on Saturday rather than at dawn on Sunday. The appearances of the risen Jesus then began from Saturday evening onward. He appeared to Mary Magdalene.
He appeared to the disciples on the road to Emmaus. He appeared to the gathered disciples in the upper room. All of these appearances happened in the period that began when the first day of the new week started at Saturday sunset. The Sunday morning discovery of the empty tomb was not the moment of resurrection. It was the moment of public announcement. The resurrection itself had already happened in the silent hours of Saturday evening, exactly 3 days and 3 nights after the body of Jesus was placed in the tomb on Wednesday evening. 3 days, 3 nights, Wednesday sunset to Saturday sunset. The promise of Jesus fulfilled, with mathematical precision that has been hidden from most Christians for nearly 2,000 years, simply because the tradition of Good Friday was too established and the knowledge of the Jewish calendar too forgotten for anyone to count the days honestly. Until now.
So now you know the mathematical problem that nobody talks about, and now you have seen the answer that the evidence points to. Jesus did not die on Friday. The mathematics of 3 days and 3 nights simply do not work from Friday afternoon to Sunday morning, no matter how generously you count. The promise Jesus made in Matthew chapter 12 was specific, precise, and verifiable. And a God who keeps his promises exactly does not make specific, precise promises and then fulfill them approximately. The evidence from the Gospel accounts themselves points to a Wednesday crucifixion. John's detail about the high day Sabbath tells us the Sabbath that was approaching when Jesus was crucified was not the regular Saturday Sabbath, but the special Passover feast day Sabbath. The apparent contradiction between Luke saying the women prepared spices before the Sabbath and Mark saying they bought spices after the Sabbath is resolved completely by a Friday shopping day between a Thursday Passover Sabbath and a Saturday weekly Sabbath. And the timing of the resurrection at sunset on Saturday fulfills the sign of Jonah with the exact 72 hours that 3 days and 3 nights requires. Now, here is what I want you to take away from this video that goes deeper than the mathematics. The precision of God is not a minor detail. It is one of the most important things you can understand about the God of the Bible. He does not say approximately. He does not say roughly. He does not say around about 3 days. He says 3 days and 3 nights. He means 3 days and 3 nights, and he delivers 3 days and 3 nights. Every prophecy fulfilled exactly, every promise kept precisely, every detail of the law of Moses pointing forward to a sacrifice that met every requirement without compromise or approximation. The God who created the universe with mathematical precision, who set the planets in their orbits with mathematical precision, who structured human DNA with mathematical precision, keeps his promises with the same mathematical precision. And the sign of Jonah was fulfilled with that same precision on a Wednesday afternoon outside Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. 3 days and 3 nights later, the stone was rolled away and death discovered that it had been defeated, not approximately, but completely and finally. Good Friday is a tradition, and traditions are not always wrong simply because they are traditions. There is genuine beauty and meaning in the way the Church has marked the crucifixion for centuries. But when a tradition contradicts the precise words of Jesus himself, it is worth looking at the evidence honestly. You have done that tonight, and now you carry a deeper understanding of the death and resurrection of Jesus than most Christians ever receive, not because the tradition was evil, but because the truth was always there in the text, waiting for someone to count the days. 3 days, 3 nights, exactly as promised. Next time on the Hidden Scrolls, we continue going deeper into the parts they never told you. Subscribe right now, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Share this video with someone who needs to see it and turn on your notifications so you never miss what we uncover next. The Hidden Scrolls, the parts they never told you.